"Nice of you to drop me off," Havel muttered, watching the last flicker of his shuttle's landing thrusters die out. He stared at the barren wasteland that stretched endlessly before him, the dusty soil pressing against his boots. He squinted up at the sun, just bright enough to hurt, but too far to be of any use. The Terran Unity had thought this would break him. They thought exile would snuff out his ideas, his defiance. Instead, they handed him the perfect opportunity to do what they feared most: think. They dumped him on Chorus 4, a graveyard of a planet far from the center of galactic life. Dead planet, dead mission. It was supposed to be a punishment, not a chance to outplay the system. He knelt and poked around in the wreckage of his shuttle. The panels were twisted and scorched, a smoldering mess after the crash landing. But Havel didn't panic. Not yet. The scent of burnt metal lingered in the air, a bitter reminder of how close he had come to never setting foot on the surface. His pack, half buried under debris, felt heavier than it should. Inside, half-spent rations and a survival kit were tucked away. Enough to keep him alive, but not much more. There were no miracles in here. No way out. He had to make it work. "Well, no help from the Unity," he muttered, grimacing as the dry wind scraped at his face. "Guess it's just me and you, Chorus." The planet greeted him with a scornful silence, as if mocking his arrival. The air was thin, barely enough to breathe. The ground beneath him, cracked and brittle, seemed to recoil from his touch, as if the planet was already tired of him. But that didn't matter. The Unity thought this place was nothing, just a dead rock on the edge of the galaxy. They were wrong, and he was going to show them just how wrong. He rummaged through the wreckage, finding what was left of his shuttle's systems. The navigation terminal was fried, but the emergency tools were intact. He spent the next few hours using the tools to salvage parts from the broken shuttle. A few basic supplies, a couple of spare batteries, and some old tech that had no real use. But there was always a way to repurpose something. Havel knew that. And in a place like this, he was going to need every ounce of ingenuity he could muster. At sunset, he set up camp in the hollowed-out remains of the shuttle, his back pressed against the cold metal as he looked out at the endless horizon. The planet's desolation made him feel like an insect in a tomb, but deep down he knew better. This was far from over. The Unity thought they could exile him, bury him, and forget about him. He wouldn't let them. Not when there was so much potential on this forsaken planet, and certainly not when there was so much technology hidden beneath its surface. The wind picked up, howling through the cracks in his shelter. He sat there for a long time, silent, watching the dying light of the sun stretch across the barren terrain. Somewhere beneath the surface of Chorus 4, something was waiting for him. He could feel it. A subtle hum beneath the dead rock, like a heartbeat that had been left behind. It wasn't the wind. It was something older, something smarter. He smirked. Guess this planet's not dead after all. With that, he shut his eyes. Tomorrow, he would start digging. The early morning light cracked through the cracks in the shuttle's hull, a grim reminder that there was no luxury here. Havel sat cross-legged on the cold floor, staring at the wreckage around him. What was supposed to be a peaceful exile, a quiet removal of an inconvenient engineer, had turned into a hell of his own making. But hell was a place that could be survived if you had the right tools, and for now, his only tools were his own hands and a broken shuttle. The first order of business wasn't shelter, it was water. His rations, expired and barely sufficient, would only get him through the first few days. But he knew the immediate problem. The planet's air was too thin for him to survive long on the limited oxygen supply in his suit. He had to find a way to extract water. The thought was practical, direct, almost clinical. He needed moisture, and he needed it now. He dug through the wreckage. Each piece of tech he pulled out a testament to his creativity rather than its original function. There were no manual instructions for making a water filtration system from a broken hydraulic pump and a few plasma coils, but there was no other choice. His hands worked with methodical precision, and the soft hum of the shuttle's remaining power systems acted as a low backdrop to his thoughts. The harsh winds outside rattled the broken panels, a constant reminder that the world outside was hostile, indifferent, waiting for him to fail. Guess I'll just have to pull moisture out of this dry hellhole, Havel muttered, staring at a bundle of wires in his hands. The air purifier, which had been useless in the crash, now found new life as a makeshift dehumidifier. Water gathered slowly in the emergency reservoir, a trickle of cold drops that didn't look like much but were everything to him. Havel smirked as he took his first sip. "Tastes like desperation," he said to no one. But it was a start. Next, shelter. The shuttle had little left to offer in terms of usable materials, but that didn't matter. Havel moved quickly, pulling out a few thick panels of alloy and scavenging the remains of insulation for anything he could use. The walls weren't sturdy enough to withstand any outside pressure, but they were enough to block the wind. He covered the entire setup with tattered survival tarps, hoping to catch whatever energy the sun still offered. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for now. He could feel the dead planet's energy, the emptiness, pressing in on him. But there was something deeper here, something he couldn't name yet. His mind pushed it aside for the moment. Survival first, curiosity later. Hours later, Havel stood outside the remnants of his shelter, scanning the horizon. The planet was still and lifeless, as it had always been, yet something tugged at his senses. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was beneath the surface of this forsaken world. At first, it had seemed like a figment of his frustration, the silent hum of desperation, playing tricks on his mind. But the longer he stood there, the more he felt that something was hidden, buried under the cracked surface of Chorus 4. It wasn't just rock and dust. There was a pulse, faint but steady, coming from deep within the planet. Havel's eyes narrowed. Signals. At first, he thought it was just the radio malfunctioning. But then the static became more frequent, the bursts of frequency sharp and rhythmic. It wasn't random. It was intentional. He walked slowly toward the crack in the ground where the signal seemed to be strongest. With each step, the vibrations under his feet became more pronounced. Something in the planet's crust was awakening, or maybe it had never truly been asleep. He crouched down, brushing aside layers of dust and brittle soil, and his fingers made contact with something smooth, hard, and strangely warm. Beneath the surface, there was an object, not just any object, but a hollow structure made of material that seemed to hum beneath his touch. Havel's breath caught in his throat. Well, this certainly wasn't on the Terran Unity's map. He dug deeper, working quickly now, his fingers moving faster as the energy around the object grew more intense. As he removed the final layer of debris, he uncovered what appeared to be a cluster of crystal-like formations, the edges glistening with an unnatural shimmer. The crystals, unlike anything he had ever seen, resonated with his touch. A soft, deep sound emitted from them like a voice without words, a hum that seemed to envelop him, drawing his attention completely. These weren't just ordinary minerals. They were alive, responding to his proximity. Havel's eyes widened. He had read about ancient alien technology, artifacts of civilizations long past. But this was something else. These weren't just artifacts. They were sentient. They manipulated energy, using their natural frequency to interact with the world around them. And they had been hidden here, buried beneath the planet's surface for eons. "Guess this place really does have a secret," he muttered, brushing his fingers against the crystal's surface, feeling its power pulse beneath his skin. A chill ran through him, not from the cold, but from the realization of what this meant. The planet had something alive in it, something intelligent, and it was willing to communicate. Havel didn't know yet how this would play out, but he knew one thing for certain: Chorus 4 had just become a much more interesting place. He stood up slowly, a smile tugging at his lips. Unity's going to regret thinking this planet was dead. Havel knelt down in the dry dust, his breath shallow in the thin atmosphere of Chorus 4. The crystal cluster lay in front of him, its multifaceted surface gleaming faintly beneath the light filtering through the cracked sky. A soft vibration buzzed under his fingers, like a pulse deep in the planet's heart. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but it resonated with his bones, an ancient hum that felt like it was calling to him. "Can you hear me?" Havel asked quietly, unsure if the words were for his own sanity or for the stones themselves. The silence stretched out, an oppressive weight pressing in from every direction. But as his fingers brushed across the edges of the crystals, they responded. A low, thrumming resonance that vibrated through the ground beneath him. It wasn't a noise exactly. It was more like a presence, a message, encoded in waves of energy. He pulled back slightly, eyes narrowed. Alive, he muttered. Not just rocks. The air around him seemed to ripple, the frequencies shifting and undulating. There was something intentional in the way the crystals interacted with him. Something that felt like a communication, but without words. It was as though they were speaking directly to his senses, bypassing language entirely, communicating in the primal rhythm of energy. He sat back on his heels, considering. It had been days since he had uncovered them, days spent in silence, except for the hum of the alien entities beneath the crust. But now he was beginning to understand. These weren't just sentient. They were interacting, tuning into his own energy, drawing him into a dance of power. His mind raced as he stood, already calculating the possibilities. The Terran Unity had no idea what lay buried here, and even if they had, they would never have understood it. But he, Havel Vokar, might just be able to harness it. He could use it. Manipulate it. And if he played his cards right, Chorus 4 would no longer be a dead planet. It would become a fortress. The next few days were a blur of rapid experimentation. Havel spent hours every day testing the resonance patterns, carefully tweaking the frequency of his attempts. The crystals responded like a finely tuned instrument. Each frequency he generated met with an equal and opposite reaction. It wasn't just simple physics. There was something alive in their responses, a deliberate intelligence behind the way they adapted to his experiments. Havel's pulse quickened. The way the energy surged through his makeshift equipment, the way it pulsed at his command, was unlike anything he had ever experienced. His tools, broken and discarded, hummed to life, their parts clicking together in a harmony that defied logic. The planet had no resources, nothing to sustain even basic life. But the crystals? They offered something far beyond survival. They offered the ability to manipulate energy itself. Let's see what you can really do. Havel muttered under his breath as he hooked the first crystal to a scrap circuit. His hands moved with practiced ease as he connected the components, all while the deep, resonant thrum of the crystals echoed in his chest. He flipped the switch, and for a brief moment nothing happened. Then, electricity, a stream of power coursed through the wires, lighting up his makeshift shelter with a brilliance he had only dreamed of before. The crystals pulsed, brighter now, as if they were feeding on the energy he had summoned, turning the dead planet into a living conduit of power. Havel felt a smile tug at the corner of his lips. Harmonic shields, he thought, the idea sparking in his mind. If he could use the resonance patterns to create an energy field, he could defend himself. And the power wasn't just limited to electricity. It was manipulating the very fabric of energy itself. It wasn't just a resource, it was a weapon. Later that night, Havel stood by his newly constructed power array, a crude yet functional device built from scraps of his shuttle, the crystals, and an array of scrap electronics he had scavenged. A pale light washed over him, the cold wind of Chorus 4 biting at his exposed face. But inside the array's bubble of protection, the temperature held steady. Let's see if it holds up against a little more than the cold, Havel muttered, his fingers flying across the control panel. He adjusted the frequency, feeling the resonance shift within the array. The air hummed around him, and for a brief moment, the entire shield shimmered with a faint blue glow, like the horizon at the edge of a storm. Then, without warning, he activated it fully. A ripple of energy surged outward, a pulse that expanded like an invisible shock wave. The ground trembled beneath his feet, but the shield held firm. The air, which had been oppressive with stillness, now thrummed with potential, vibrating like a harp string tuned to perfection. Havel laughed quietly to himself, a sound tinged with disbelief. He'd done it. He had turned Chorus 4 from an empty graveyard into something alive, something capable of defending itself. But then, as the hum of the shield settled into a soft, steady resonance, a strange sensation crept over him, an eerie feeling, a nagging thought, one that made him pause. What else was hidden beneath the surface? He had only scratched the surface of the planet's power, but something about the crystals felt like they were holding back. It wasn't just the energy they offered, it was how they offered it. "All right," he said, shaking his head and pushing the thought aside. Not the time, not yet. He had more to do, much more, and the Unity would soon learn that Chorus 4 was far from a dead planet. It was a sleeping giant, and when it woke, it would have a new master. The ground beneath Havel's feet vibrated again. This time, it wasn't just a hum of energy. It was something different. The crystals pulsed brighter, sending ripples of light through the dark, barren landscape. A voice, though unspoken, reverberated in his bones. It was the same low frequency that had first drawn him to the crystals, but now it was stronger, more insistent. And Havel knew deep down that the planet wasn't just alive, it was calling him to something greater. A decision lay ahead of him: to harness this power and use it to build a fortress, or to push further into the unknown, deeper into the planet's secrets. The choice was his, and he would make it in his own way, at his own pace. The planet was silent, almost too silent. Chorus 4 had been abandoned by all but the wind, which howled over the jagged plains like a wolf prowling the night. Havel Vokar stood at the apex of a rocky ridge, scanning the horizon. His eyes were sharp, but his mind was sharper. He had no time for the paralyzing quiet. The Unity fleet was coming. They thought they had him cornered, a mere engineer sent to die on a dead planet. They were wrong. "Let's see if they can survive the quiet," Havel muttered under his breath. His fingers hovered over the control panel, eyes flicking over the glowing readouts that pulsed with growing energy. His hands were steady as he adjusted the frequency settings of the planetary shielding system. The resonance field, manipulated by the alien crystals, surged through the planet's core, silently shifting the ground beneath him. He could feel it, a low hum that vibrated in his chest, a reminder that Chorus 4 wasn't as dead as they believed. The Unity would arrive soon. Havel had no illusions about the force they would bring. They were efficient, cold, and arrogant. He had watched them destroy countless colonies with ease, but they would not find the same success here. He had spent 6 months preparing for this, building a network of energy shields, setting traps beneath the surface, and using every scrap of tech from his shuttle and the ancient crystal network to turn this barren wasteland into a fortress. The pulse of the crystals was growing stronger, and Havel was just beginning to see their full potential. The crystals, which had once seemed like a curiosity, now seemed to speak to him. The frequencies of their resonance intertwined with his thoughts. He could feel the power surging through them, and he knew he could harness it. The shields were not just defensive, they were a weapon, and if he was going to survive the coming assault, he would need to strike first. His hands moved deftly over the controls, activating a secondary energy grid that ran through the planet's crust. The network wasn't fully operational yet, but the Unity's sensors would never be able to detect it. Havel smiled. The cold metal of his ships remains gleaming under the red light of the dying sun. The Unity was about to face an enemy they didn't understand. And it wasn't just him they were coming for. "Let them come," Havel whispered. "They'll wish they hadn't." The shield generators hummed to life, vibrating the ground beneath his feet. The air around him thickened as energy currents flowed through the planet, running like invisible rivers under the surface. He had worked tirelessly, laying traps, constructing weapons, and preparing the land itself for the battle to come. Every rock, every valley, every ridge had been mapped and accounted for. He had made sure the Unity fleet would never see it coming. His fingers danced over the display, bringing up the deployment grid. The Unity's standard operating procedure was simple: dropships, ground troops, heavy artillery, and a show of force. They would use brute force, thinking they could overwhelm him in a matter of hours. But Havel had other plans. His traps were already set, waiting to be activated at the perfect moment. The Unity would land, and then, Just when they thought they had the upper hand, Chorus 4 would fight back. Once they land, it's game over, Havel muttered. His voice was low, but there was no doubt in his words. He had done his homework. The Unity's reliance on outdated technology would be their downfall. Their sensors were designed to scan for conventional threats, ships, explosives, basic weaponry. But he had learned how to manipulate the crystal resonance to create an invisible wall. The energy interference would scramble their detection systems, sending them on a wild goose chase until it was too late. He moved to the next station and began configuring the weapons system. It was simple, yet effective. The crystals would be used to amplify the planet's natural energy flow, creating a resonance beam capable of disabling enemy vehicles, disrupting their electronics, and, if necessary, crippling entire fleets. All without a single shot fired. Havel glanced out over the plateau. The Unity fleet would be here soon. He could feel it in his bones. This was it, the culmination of everything he had worked for. His hand paused over the final control. He could either activate the trap now or wait for their arrival and let them make the first move. The silence of the planet felt heavier now, like it was holding its breath. No, Havel said, shaking his head. I'll make them feel it first. He keyed in the final sequence, watching as the energy shields flared to life. The landscape around him shifted imperceptibly. The first of the Unity ships would fall right into his trap. With a quick glance, he scanned the status of the surrounding network. Everything was in place. All he had to do now was wait. Hours passed in the relentless heat, each moment stretching into the next. Havel sat silently, watching the screen, listening to the rhythmic pulse of the planet. The Unity fleet would land soon. He couldn't afford any mistakes. He double-checked the sequence, ensuring that the frequency resonator was fully calibrated. If it wasn't, the entire defense system could collapse. Then, without warning, a low rumble shook the ground. The Unity fleet had arrived. Havel straightened up, his fingers twitching over the controls. They were here. They didn't know it yet, but they were already in the center of his web. "They're early," Havel muttered, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "No matter, let's see how they like Chorus 4. The Unity fleet appeared on the horizon, sleek ships descending from the black sky like a swarm of predatory birds. Commander Lask Arik, seated in the flagship's command chair, grinned with confidence as his fleet spread across the sky. His voice crackled through the comms, smooth and assured. "This is Chorus 4. Prepare for an easy operation. This rock's been dead for years. We'll secure the area, salvage what's left, and report back in a few hours," he announced, the arrogance dripping from his tone. In the dark expanse, the Unity fleet's arrival seemed to stir the very air of Course 4. The planet, long forgotten and silent, began to hum with an energy it had not known in millennia. Below the surface, the crystalline resonance began to awaken, responding to the invaders with a primal force. On the ground, Havel Vokar, now fully integrated with the alien technology, stood still, watching the incoming ships through his heads-up display. His fingers flew over the controls, tweaking the frequency of the resonance waves. He could feel the subtle shift in the planet's pulse, like the beat of a drum, rising steadily. "Let's see how long your confidence lasts," Havel whispered, his voice devoid of emotion. The first pulse hit the Unity fleet like a slap to the face. A shockwave of distortion rippled through their ships, throwing off their sensors. Communications scrambled, voices came through garbled, distorted. Arik's voice cut through the chaos, barely recognizable as it crackled through the interference. "What the hell is happening?" he barked, slamming his fist on the console. "Get those frequencies cleared up now." His crew scrambled to adjust their equipment, but it was too late. The resonance wave created by the Corisian crystals distorted their communications, and the ship's systems began to malfunction. The Unity's automated defenses misfired, triggering false alarms. The lead ship's shields flickered in and out of existence, the crew powerless to maintain control. On the surface, Havel smiled grimly. His strategy was unfolding perfectly. The second pulse hit, more concentrated, more deliberate. This time the fleet felt it. Engines sputtered. Weapons systems flickered. and for the briefest of moments, their ships hung motionless in the sky. Confusion spread like wildfire. The once imposing fleet was now a tangled mess of malfunctioning systems and scrambling soldiers. In the distance, Havel could see their landing craft descending. He had already prepared for this. His traps were set. Now, he murmured. With a single command, the ground beneath them began to shift. Hidden mechanisms built into the surface of Chorus 4 triggered, launching a barrage of energy beams, all controlled by the resonance system. Unity ships were caught off guard as their defenses failed to detect the attacks until it was too late. The first explosion lit up the sky as an energy pulse erupted from the ground, striking the lead craft. It staggered, its hull twisting under the force. The Unity fleet retaliated, but their movements were disjointed, each ship responding differently to the damage. Some attempted to break formation, others tried to re-establish their weapons systems. But the disruption caused by Havel's technology was too much to overcome. "Commander, we've lost power to secondary systems," a panicked voice echoed from the communications room. "Don't just stand there," Arik shouted, fury rising in his chest. "Reboot the entire system. We're not leaving empty-handed." But his orders fell on deaf ears as his fleet descended further into disarray. Havel, from his vantage point, saw the panic unfolding in real time. He leaned forward, his gaze locked on the screens. Each moment was calculated, a masterpiece of strategic warfare. He had prepared for every eventuality. "People thought they could bulldoze this planet," Havel muttered, his fingers moving to engage the final trap. "They'll learn to regret that." The final phase of his plan was set into motion. The Chorus 4 resonance network sent a third, devastating pulse into the air. This time, it was different. It wasn't just a pulse of energy. It was a destructive wave that sliced through the Unity fleet's communications like a blade through silk. Every Unity ship was disconnected from one another, isolated, confused. Havel's plan was working. He could feel the shift in the air as the ships floundered, trying to reassemble some kind of offensive. The crystalline entities beneath the planet's surface hummed louder, the energy flow growing ever more powerful. Chorus 4 was no longer just a dead planet. It was alive, and it was fighting back. On the Unity flagship, Arik's voice cracked with disbelief. "This shouldn't be happening. Get us out of here, now!" But it was too late. Chorus 4 was no longer just a barren rock. It had teeth. Commander Lask Arik clenched his fists, glaring at the endless stretches of Chorus 4's surface through the observation window. The Unity fleet had been blindsided. The planet had turned its desolate face into a weapon. His strategy had faltered. His pride had faltered. "Regroup," Arik snapped, his voice like ice. "Prepare for a second strike. We'll hit them with everything we've got." The fleet was slower to react than usual. Their systems, despite all the best adjustments, still buzzed with erratic energy surges. The resonance waves that had so thoroughly crippled their offensive were a reminder of the unpredictable forces they were up against. "Realign the ships, get every cruiser in formation, fire at will. We're not wasting any more time," Arik ordered, his voice growing more firm. From his command center on Chorus 4, Havel Vokar observed the fleet's regrouping with grim satisfaction. He'd seen their maneuvering before, knew it by heart. This wasn't the first time he'd been at the receiving end of a military's arrogance. But the Unity had underestimated what was beneath Chorus 4's barren surface. Beneath it, he found a partner in his fight, a silent force. The Carizian crystals hummed in perfect resonance with the planet's core. They were alive as any creature Havel had encountered, pulsing with energy that had slumbered for eons. It was no accident they had been buried. Their very existence was linked to this world. A few months ago, Havel had no idea that he would find them, no idea he would be speaking to them through his hands and feet, but the planet's technology wasn't just a weapon. It was a mind, and now it was his ally. He activated the next sequence of traps. Havel's fingers hovered over the controls, sending low-frequency pulses through the planet's energy channels. The ship-to-ship communication systems of the fleet crackled with interference as the dissonant hum of the crystals amplified. He couldn't help but smirk. The fleet was about to experience a version of warfare they weren't prepared for. Double. They won't know what hit them, he murmured almost to himself. The Unity fleet had just played into his hands. The trap was set. The first barrage from the Unity fleet came in fast, a series of long-range artillery blasts designed to rupture the planet's surface and bombard any stronghold on the ground. The air above Caris 4 rippled as the projectiles cut through the atmosphere. But they didn't reach their target. A wave of energy pulsed across the planet's surface, momentarily distorting the incoming artillery. Instead of striking the ground, the projectiles veered off course, missing their mark by several hundred meters. It was as if the planet itself was shrugging them off, diverting their destructive force. The Unity ships, temporarily disoriented by the failed attack, hesitated. On the surface, Havel had set the planetary shields into full effect, the energy channels of the Corisian crystals feeding the defenses, creating an invisible wall that rejected anything unnatural. The incoming barrage was rendered useless in the face of the planet's power. The fleet, stunned by the failure of their first strike, sent a second volley of fire. But Havel had anticipated that, too. He amplified the pulse, this time shifting the frequency slightly. The surface of Caris 4 trembled as the crystals responded. The planet itself seemed to stretch its boundaries, reaching out to disrupt the fleet. Havel initiated a series of electromagnetic pulses, sending ripples through the Unity's formations. Suddenly, ships began to falter in mid-air, their navigational systems scrambled by the pulse. Some veered off course, colliding with each other, while others fell silent, their engines sputtering out of control. "What the hell is happening?" Arik growled as his ship's systems flickered. His hands slammed onto the console in front of him. "Report! Now!" "We've lost control of several ships, sir. The energy field, something is affecting our systems. We can't override it," his communications officer replied, panic in his voice. The Unity fleet, now facing chaos within their own ranks, launched an immediate counterattack. They shifted to manual control, bringing their heaviest warships into the fray. They began to fire with reckless abandon, hoping to overwhelm the planet's defenses with sheer firepower. But they were being lured into a trap, and they couldn't see it yet. Havel watched with cold focus, his hands still working the controls. He wasn't just reacting. He was orchestrating a symphony of destruction. The planet's natural forces were his instruments now. Forces of electromagnetic power, solar winds, even the tectonic activity deep within the core, all under his command. "Let them come," Havel said under his breath, his eyes narrowing with intensity. He knew that they wouldn't stop until they had exhausted every possibility. That was how the Unity worked. They would try again, and again, but each failure would push them further into his trap. The next sequence was more sophisticated. Havel synchronized the planetary shields with the natural magnetic field, amplifying the energy flows to create a magnetic storm that disabled the Unity's radar systems. As the fleet began to fire blindly, Havel set his final trap into motion. He manipulated the resonance waves, turning them into a signal so dense it was nearly impossible to decipher. The Unity ships were firing at shadows, their weapons ineffective. "I warned them," Havel muttered to himself, a slight grin tugging at the corner of his lips. "You came here expecting an easy conquest, but you've underestimated the very planet you sought to take." Commander Arik was shaking with frustration, helpless as his fleet continued to struggle under Havel's unseen hand. "This can't be happening," he spat. "We are the Unity. We do not lose." But the planet didn't care about the Unity's arrogance. It didn't care about their orders, their power. It had become something more than just a dead world. It was now an active force, an entity aligned with Havel's will. And it wasn't going to let the Unity take it without a fight. As the fleet began to falter under the relentless pressure of Caris 4's natural forces and Havel's calculated tactics, he felt a sense of dark satisfaction. This was only the beginning. The Unity would be forced to adapt. They had no idea what was coming next. But one thing was certain. Havel wasn't just surviving anymore, he was taking control. The Unity's arrogance had given him a chance to strike back. And this time, they wouldn't be so lucky. The air was electric, the quiet tension broken only by the occasional ping of distant weaponry. Havel Vokar's eyes flickered to the tactical display before him, his hands still steady despite the chaos unfolding around him. The Unity fleet, once arrogantly confident in their superiority, had now cornered themselves. Havel had expected this. Eric, ever the fool, believed he could simply send his soldiers down to clean up the mess. Time to give them one last lesson, Havel muttered under his breath, a dark smile creeping across his face. Commander Arik had issued his final order: send everything. It wasn't enough to destroy Havel's defenses from orbit. They were coming down, directly to the surface, to capture him. The Unity's pride demanded it. They had sent boarding parties, expecting the planet's primitive defenses to break under the weight of their attack. The heavy shuttlecraft thudded against the dry ground, carrying their elite forces to the surface. They had underestimated the depth of Havel's preparation. He watched them through the planet's deep surveillance network, his fingers dancing across the heads-up display, activating the planet's last line of defense. The resonance waves that had disrupted their fleets would now be turned on their boarding parties. Havel's grin widened. "I hope they enjoy the view," he whispered. As the boarding parties made their way toward his position, their communication systems scrambled by the resonating frequencies. The ground beneath them shifted. Silent but violent, the planet was coming alive. Beneath the dust and desolation, hidden underground channels hummed with energy. Crystalline spikes erupted from the earth, forming a jagged perimeter that was nearly invisible to the naked eye. The resonance frequencies hummed louder now, bending the air, creating a magnetic pulse that crippled their electronic equipment. The Unity soldiers had no idea what hit them. The first wave of soldiers scattered, their rifles raised, but nothing worked. Their weapons malfunctioned, their advanced technology useless in the face of Cores 4's unexpected defiance. The ground trembled as massive crystal formations rose from the surface, acting as both barriers and weapons. As the soldiers tried to move, they found themselves surrounded by barriers of energy they couldn't see, the earth itself clawing at them. They tried to call for backup, but their communication devices were useless. "Damn it, get the lasers online," shouted one of the commanders as he fired at the nearest crystal. It was futile, the laser beams dissipating the moment they neared the structure. Panic began to set in, but it was too late. Meanwhile, Havel stood atop a ridgeline, overseeing the chaos he had created. His fingers moved quickly across the control panel, locking the soldiers into place. He was in control now, and the Unity fleet had nowhere to run. "Is this how you thought it would go?" Havel's voice echoed through the comms, reaching the desperate commander below. "You thought you could simply walk onto this planet and claim it. You forgot to consider what happens when you poke the wrong thing." He adjusted the frequencies, amplifying the power in the crystals, sending waves of destabilizing energy through the ground. The Unity soldiers staggered as the ground beneath them turned to soft mud, unable to support their weight. The high-tech combat boots they wore weren't designed for this kind of terrain. Every step they took brought them deeper into a trap, and Havel watched them fall into it. They had been forced into a war on his terms. One soldier tried to break free, attempting to crawl toward an exit, but it was a hopeless move. He didn't get far before a crystal spike shot from the earth, pinning him in place. The others scattered, shouting in confusion and fear, but their escape was impossible. The more they fought, the deeper they were drawn into the heart of the planet's wrath. Commander Arig's voice crackled through Havel's communicator, laced with rage. "This ends now, Vokar. You won't win this." Havel chuckled, leaning back as the last of the boarding parties fell into disarray. "Is that what you think?" His voice was calm, yet tinged with undeniable triumph. "You should have understood this planet long ago, Arik. It's alive. And you just woke it up." The Unity's command ship, hovering above, was still firing indiscriminately, but its attacks were growing weaker, unable to penetrate the shield Havel had created. The resonance from the crystal network had reached its peak, and the power was overwhelming. The Unity ship's systems began to shut down as the frequency distorted their electronics. Within moments, their weapons became nothing more than a futile attempt to break through a force that could not be penetrated. Cavil smirked at the desperation in Eric's voice. "Your fleet is scrambling, Commander. They're losing their nerve. And so are you." The Unity command ship was forced to retreat, but it couldn't move fast enough. Its engines sputtered as the resonance waves locked onto its core systems. The entire vessel began to spin out of control, its trajectory a chaotic spiral as it fought against the forces it couldn't comprehend. Cavil tightened his grip on the control panel, knowing it was time to finish this. With one final sequence, the crystals aligned, focusing a pulse that surged directly at the Unity ship. The vessel lurched violently, its hull groaning as the energy ripped through its structure. In an instant, the Unity flagship was crippled, its systems completely fried. "Victory," Havel said simply. He wasn't interested in speeches. The results spoke for themselves. The Unity fleet, now crippled and in disarray, had no command ship, no coordination, no direction. Their soldiers were scattered and their morale had evaporated. They couldn't mount another attack, not like this. Not anymore. Havel stood alone, the battlefield eerily silent, the energy of the planet subsiding. The storm had passed. "Tell your Unity that Chorus 4 isn't their prize to claim," Havel muttered under his breath, gazing at the wreckage of the fleet. Not anymore. The Unity's final attempt to take Chorus 4 had failed. The planet had been claimed, but not by them. It had been claimed by Havel Vokar, and in doing so, he had secured his own freedom. The dust was settling. The Unity fleet had retreated, leaving only the remnants of their arrogance behind. Pavel stood on the edge of a cliff, overlooking the remains of the battlefield. The sky was a dull orange, the air thick with the scent of burned metal and ozone. The planet, once a forgotten outpost on the edge of the galaxy, now hummed with new life. Chorus 4 was no longer a dead world. It had a flag, a kill count, and, more importantly, it had a new identity. Havel had given it that. The shimmering crystal spires that had once been his greatest fear now stood as monuments to his ingenuity. They reached skyward, their resonance frequencies still lingering in the air, a constant reminder of the victory that had been won through strategy and cunning. There was no celebration, no cheering, just the quiet acknowledgement of what had been accomplished. His fingers danced across the heads-up display embedded in his suit, sending the final signals to the communications relay. A simple message, but one that would echo across the galaxy. Chorus 4 was now independent. The Unity's claim on this planet was no more. As the final pulse went out, Havel allowed himself a moment of reflection. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about showing the galaxy that the system, the bureaucracy that had cast him aside, could be defied. He'd done more than survive. He'd turned the tables. And now Chorus 4 stood free. His eyes narrowed as he surveyed the horizon. Unity forces were retreating, their ships retreating into the distance like wounded beasts, their broken ships trailing smoke across the sky. The once mighty Unity fleet had been decimated. They had underestimated him, and the planet they thought they could use for their own gain had become their greatest failure. "You came here to steal a dead planet," Havel muttered under his breath, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Instead, you just found your worst mistake." The words lingered in the still air, as though the planet itself was echoing them back to him. Havel turned away from the vista, heading toward the heart of the planet's newly established stronghold. The crystalline technology was his to command now. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival had turned into something far greater. The planet had become a weapon, an extension of his will, a testament to his resourcefulness and his refusal to bow to a system that didn't value him. He walked into the command center, his boots clicking sharply on the stone floors. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the crystal cores. The air inside was cool and still, the temperature carefully regulated by the resonance fields that powered the facility. Havel glanced at the control panels, seeing the energy signatures from the resonating crystals pulse steadily. It was a symphony of power now, one that only he understood. "We're free," Havel said aloud to himself. But the freedom wasn't just for him. It was for the planet, for the people who would one day inhabit it, for all the exiles, the forgotten souls who had been cast aside by a system that didn't care. The Unity's retreating fleet was now nothing more than a distant memory. The final battle had been won, not with sheer force, but with cunning and patience. Havel had outplayed them, each move calculated, each trap laid with precision. The Unity's pride had been their downfall. Havel stood tall, the weight of his victory settling over him. There would be no parades, no accolades, no recognition from the galaxy. He had never needed any of that. What mattered was what he had accomplished. He had taken a dead planet and turned it into a symbol of defiance, a place where the will of the individual could triumph over the suffocating bureaucracy of the galaxy. The display in front of him flickered to life, showing a final readout of the battle. The Unity fleet had suffered devastating losses, their forces decimated, their command ship crippled beyond repair. Commander Lask Arek's fate was sealed. Havel had made sure of it. The arrogance of the Unity had been their undoing, and now their moral and strategic center had crumbled under the weight of their own failures. Havel allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, but only a brief one. There was still work to be done. The planet was free, but it wasn't safe. The galaxy would be watching, waiting for the next move, and he would be ready. As the last of the Unity ships disappeared into the distance, Havel walked outside, his boots crunching on the rocky surface of Chorus 4. He looked up at the sky at the new flag that fluttered above the planet. It wasn't the flag of the Unity, but of something else entirely. Something new, something that had never existed before. It was the flag of Chorus 4, and it was his. The wind kicked up, carrying the faint scent of crystal and dust. The landscape stretched out before him, vast and empty, but full of potential. It was a blank slate, waiting for its future. And Havel Vokar was the one who would write it. No more, Havel whispered to himself, as the horizon darkened and the stars began to emerge in the sky. No more will they think they can control us. With one final glance at the horizon, he walked back into the heart of Chorus 4, ready to face whatever the future held. It wasn't over yet, but today, victory was his. Today, Chorus 4 had been declared free. And tomorrow? Tomorrow, the galaxy would remember the name Havel Vokar. The end had come, and a new beginning was just starting. The wind had changed. The hum of Chorus 4 was no longer the quiet sound of emptiness, but the rhythm of a living world, thrumming with the pulse of something new, something that had never existed before. As Havel Vokar stood atop the command platform, looking out at the landscape, the weight of what had been accomplished settled in. Chorus 4, once abandoned and forgotten, was now thriving under his watch. It was more than just a colony or a refuge. It was a new beginning, a new world that stood tall against the vast and unyielding bureaucracy of the galaxy. 6 months had passed since the last assault, and in that time, Havel had overseen the transformation of the barren landscape into a thriving community. The very crystals that had once terrified him now pulsed with purpose, powering every corner of the planet. Energy flowed freely, harvested from the deep resonance beneath the surface. What had once been a planet of isolation and despair was now a bastion of technological innovation and defiance. The people of Chorus 4, those few who had survived the initial stages of Havel's rebellion, had built a society unlike any the galaxy had seen. There were no grand speeches, no pompous declarations from the high and mighty. There was only work, building, innovating, creating. A society born of necessity, born of rebellion, and forged in the fires of ingenuity. "I'm not a leader," Havel said to himself, though the words sounded foreign coming from his mouth. There was no one here to argue. His words were his own now. Chorus 4 had no need for elected officials or bureaucratic overseers. His leadership was an unspoken truth, not one of control, but of direction. His mind was what guided this new world, not his title. The planet belonged to no one, and everyone at once. The planet's people had no flag to wave before, no emblem to identify themselves by, but now, the blue and green banner of Chorus 4 hung from the high spires, a symbol of resistance. A new identity. The planet had a history, a legacy of survival, but it was not defined by the mistakes of its past. It was reborn by the choices of those who stood firm, who had the audacity to dream differently. As the months rolled on, more ships came, not from the Unity this time, but from other systems. Some came to trade, others to join. Word of Corsair's 4's independence spread across the galaxy, carried by whispers, by rumors, by data packets smuggled through the black net of space. Havel's victory had ignited something in the galaxy. It had reminded the people that even the smallest voice could make a difference, that even the most insignificant world could have its say. "You came here to steal a dead planet," Havel muttered under his breath again, as the wind picked up, rustling the edges of the new banner. He chuckled, though the sound was dark. "Instead, you found your worst mistake." The words carried with them a weight now, one that would echo through the galaxy long after Chorus 4 had firmly planted itself as a symbol of defiance. It was a reminder to those who would take everything, planets, people, resources, that the price of underestimating someone could be the cost of their entire empire. Havel's fingers tapped lightly on the heads-up display in front of him, watching as the new systems activated. The planet had transformed, not only physically but ideologically. The citizens of Chorus 4 no longer feared being silenced. They no longer feared the weight of a system that would crush them under the guise of progress. They had learned to stand tall, to make their own decisions, and now they carried the banner of freedom with them wherever they went. His mind drifted back to the final days of the battle, when Commander Lask Arik and his fleet had thought they could reclaim what they had lost. They had underestimated Havel, as so many before him had. They had believed that they could simply roll over a forgotten planet, snuff out its pulse, and walk away. But Chorus 4 had fought back, and it had done so with ingenuity and a resolve that no amount of firepower could overcome. The Unity had tried to destroy them, but instead they had ignited a fire that would spread across the galaxy. Havel took a deep breath, feeling the cool, dry air fill his lungs. There was no longer the sharp taste of fear, but of something else. Anticipation. The future was now a vast, uncharted territory. He had secured Chorus 4's independence, but the ripple effect had only just begun. Other planets would rise, other voices would join the chorus. The galaxy had just been reminded that it wasn't just the powerful who could shape history. He stood alone, watching as the sun set over the horizon of Chorus 4. The light from the dying star cast long shadows across the rocky surface. But there was no darkness, there was no fear, only possibility. Chorus 4 had become more than just a place. It had become a beacon, a symbol of what could be achieved when the will of one person collided with the impossible. Havel smiled to himself. The system will learn, the galaxy will learn. He had taken a dead planet, and in its place, he had created something that could never be erased. Chorus 4 was a new beginning, a world built on human ingenuity, innovation, and an unwavering belief in the impossible. The stars above glittered, distant and cold, as they had been for centuries. But Havel, looking out over the future he had shaped, knew that this time they had someone to watch. Someone who wouldn't fade away quietly. Someone who would make sure that the galaxy never forgot the name of Chorus 4. This was not just victory, it was rebirth, and no one would ever take that from him.